Cool. Officially recording. Thank you guys for joining us for another edition of the Knowledge Drop, this time with Casey Malone. Good dude who, like I mentioned, 20 feet away from right now, here in Chiang Mai. And if you guys haven't joined before, just going through the housekeeping real quick before I pass the mic over to Casey. Basically, y'all are using the chat box, so you guys figured that one out. Feel free to chat throughout Casey's presentation, compliment our unique and similar haircuts. Or whatever you want to chat about. And then also there's a question and answer box. So if you've never been to like the webinar feature of Zoom, you can use the Q&A little option there for any questions that come up throughout Casey's talk. And we'll try to circle back to those if we have 5 minutes or so at the end for some live question and answer. And other than that, thanks again for being here. As I mentioned, this is getting recorded, so this will be saved in our Knowledge Drop archive for all of eternity, as long as the internet exists. And you guys can share it with your friends and watch it over and over again. But with all that out the way, let me pass it over to you, Casey. Thanks again, man. I appreciate you doing this, and it's a long overdue subject. I feel like it's a good one that we finally got onto.
Sure, no problem. Thanks for asking me, Travis. I really appreciate it. And hey, I see like 2 people from Bogota and 7 people that have not identified where you're from. But wherever you're from, I'm jealous, and I'm already in an awesome place. So well done. Here we go. So I'm going to share my screen here, and we will kick this off. So yeah, again, thanks, Travis. And I know you already talked about this, but for anybody who just joined, or maybe just because I like to hear myself say it out loud, we're in Chiang Mai right now, and I've been traveling through Asia, drinking cheap coconut water and getting shirts tailored. So life is pretty awesome. Things are good. Things are really good. As we mentioned, this is an area that I have some, experience in, essentially. And really what we're here to talk about today is this idea of a value proposition and why you might need one. So what we're about to drop, value proposition design is actually a methodology around business development and business strategy that we really like to think of as kind of the core of the beginning of a business model. I really prefer value proposition design over some other methods of getting started with business for a few reasons. I'm a writer by trade, and so I think that actually probably leans into why I like this. But really, my favorite piece about it is that I consider a value proposition to be the most inexpensive way you could possibly prototype your business. And so a lot of people think of value propositions as marketing tools, kind of the core piece of copy that then goes on to generate marketing and marketing materials. And while that is true, I do think that before it becomes that, it's actually a really valuable strategy tool and business development tool to understand if you have a hole in your business, essentially, and like as it relates to your customers' pain points and your customers' needs. There's also another nice side effect of doing this kind of training or doing this kind of work for yourself. If you work in teams, I've worked in a lot of teams, and I've worked in some successful ones, and I've worked in some very unsuccessful teams. And one of the things that frequently characterized lack of success on the teams that I've worked on or worked in has been an inability to communicate on this with using the same language, essentially using the same terms for success. And so I think this is also a great starting point to start communicating from a similar point of view, specifically how your product relates to your customers' pain points and your customers' successes. If we move over to the other column here, stage right for me, I'm not sure how it is when you're looking at it, but essentially over here is why you might give a shit about what I have to say. So we'll breeze through this part pretty quickly. But I've worked, as mentioned, probably in the invite if you got to that part, both in advertising agencies for my entire career and then in-house for about half of my career. That didn't actually make sense. It's split about 50-50 in-house and advertising agencies. I started out as a copywriter, a freelance copywriter working at ad agencies in Seattle, working for some big but local brands, and then ended up moving in-house to some large corporations and some large tech companies doing very similar work, but in-house. In my, interesting and roundabout career, I've had the opportunity to work as a creative director rebranding an airline, which was Alaska Airlines. I've led messaging and messaging strategy for the launch of 4 consumer electronics products for Microsoft Surface, so a series of computers. And then also went on most recently, before I started my own business, to to lead messaging strategy for artificial intelligence as a product and a service for NVIDIA, which is a big Silicon Valley chip maker. Essentially working to help establish how we would sell AI as a service to people, to other large companies, which is a super fun gig. I actually took that job specifically because of the challenge. It felt like it was a really interesting opportunity to work in marketing around a subject and a product that had never had any precedent set around how it was marketed. So super fun times. Ping me afterwards if you want to chat more about AI and deep learning. That's kind of my weekend reading material. Sorry, technical difficulties. 1 second. There we go. Just hit the keyboard harder. So what we're here to do today is, first and foremost, if you don't get anything out of this, I would really love for the big takeaway for anybody who's on this webinar to start creating a shared language of value creation across your team and with the people you work with, whether it's your clients, your bosses, your direct reports, your manager, whatever it is. I think that even having a loose understanding of these ideas can be really valuable in terms of communicating within your own team. As we mentioned before, I really like value propositions as the cheapest prototype for a business you'll ever find. Really, you can actually, in the best case scenario, you can do this kind of exercise and discover that there's a large gap in your business plan by simply writing a paragraph of text, which I swear to God is the cheapest way you'll ever figure that out. And you know, if I really do think success is finding that gap with this kind of work rather than writing something perfect out of the gate. And so if you do come across, you know, if you take this homework away and you do find a gap in your business model, or a particular pain point that you're not addressing with your current business, service, product, whatever it is, I would consider that a massive success for this. And then of course, as homework, I'm going to talk through a little bit about how to write a first draft of a value proposition for yourself or for your organization. A couple notes near the end about just some personal tips around writing, but let's just summarize it up top by saying it'll be messy and it'll probably suck in the first draft, and that's really good. That's how you want it to be. So one thing I really like to call attention to at the very beginning of any presentation that I do, but particularly a professional one about this kind of stuff, is that I've only had about 6 original ideas in my entire life, and none of them have had to do with work. So this is no exception. Everything that I'm talking about today is actually the brainchild of a really incredible organization based out of Switzerland called Strategizer. They've pioneered 2, I guess like business model exploration tools that I strongly recommend everybody spend some time researching. The one on the left in this like childlike illustration is actually called the Business Model Canvas, which we won't talk about today because I'm less of an expert in it, and also 30 minutes would not cover it. Suffice it to say, if you are starting a business, particularly a startup of any kind, an app, a product, anything along those lines, I strongly encourage you to do a business model canvas. What they discovered when they wrote their second book is that these 2 cells that I've circled in bright yellow for some reason are actually the parts that pertain to a value proposition specifically for business. And so they decided in their second book to expand upon 2 cells from their initial project, these two areas of exploration. And that's what the value proposition canvas is actually those 2 pieces from this earlier piece of work blown out in more detail. So why might you actually care enough to do something like this? I think it's a pretty realistic question to ask, and I'll address it as quickly as I can. I've worked, as mentioned up top, I've worked in a bunch of really large, really complicated, really, in some ways, exciting and fantastic companies, and in some ways, incredibly frustrating companies. So Microsoft is a really incredible place to work. They do some really cool stuff. It's also probably the most frustrating place I've ever worked, with the exception of the place that I worked immediately after that, which was NVIDIA. Both of those places had very smart people in very high positions of power within the marketing organizations that had a really hard time addressing this idea. Particularly at NVIDIA, it was a very technical company selling very technical products, and we were frequently told to speak to our customers in a very technical way. And that, at the end of the day, I fought regularly for this idea that regardless of how technical your product is, you are selling it to a human being on the other end. And if you don't at least start to understand what that person's life is like, what they go through, what their jobs are, what success looks like for them, you're not going to be able to speak to them about why they need your product. This is a common problem in Silicon Valley, but all over the world. Anywhere there's tech products developed, people are really feature crazy. And I think this is an understandable trap to fall into for anybody, but particularly people that have built something really elegant, beautiful, and complex, which most tech products are these days. And I've been around a bunch of startups and a bunch of people building projects, and the kind of mind it takes to build something beautiful and technical is a kind of mind that I greatly admire. However, it's also the kind of mind that will frequently be overcome with the desire to tell people exactly how they built things after they've built it. And while there's a place in marketing to talk to people about what your product does and how it was made, that place is very rarely up top or in the beginning of how you have a conversation with your customers. That place needs to come a ways down the line and is probably only appropriate for a certain handful of people. So this is a common piece of work that I end up doing with a lot of companies, where it's essentially shifting a perspective away from how something is made or even what something does towards how it's going to change the life of the person that uses it. And it's actually conveying the same information. It's just a shift in perspective. It's basically a 180-degree shift in perspective, putting yourself in the shoes of your customer. If you're anything like me, you've probably been a part of a million fun, creative, awesome side projects. Some of them have been technical in nature. I have yet to be incredibly successful with any of my creative technical side projects. And I'd say a good 2/3 of those are because I was building things for myself rather than building things for customers or people in the world, real people in the world. And so it turns out that I found out through like brutal and kind of really torturous trial and error that I am not my own customer. And I can pretty much guarantee that you're not your own customer as well. So the first and most important thing to do in any business venture is go find your customer and have a real conversation with them. Don't imagine, like I have many, many times, that because I like it, somebody will buy it. So really, this is a good tool to avoid dead projects. To move forward into something a little more concrete, I think the most important thing to understand and the fundamental piece of this presentation that I would like to impart through this whole talk is this idea of what is value. What is value in a business, and how do you communicate it? And so the example I really like to use is a extremely well-known global brand, Michelin. And so, if you were here in person, or if we had time to really chat through the thread, I would ask you literally to like come back with an answer of like, what does Michelin sell? And 9 times out of 10, 9 times out of 10, Travis will jump in off mute and yell tires. But generally, that's the obvious answer, right? Yes. God, I feel like I was just photobombed in this. Yeah, and so tires, right? Tires is what Michelin sells, is the appropriate answer or the common answer, which is why it's also the next slide. But a big turning point in Michelin's marketing strategy, and actually Michelin's success, came in a shift in perspective for them when they realized that actually Michelin makes tires, but Michelin sells safety. And it's, in some ways, it may feel like a subtle difference, but it's actually a really like fundamental shift in the way that they communicated their brand and their product to their customers. Nobody really cares about tread patterns on tires. Everybody cares about getting their kid home at night in the rain. And you'll find that if you see everybody followed suit. Every auto company followed suit. Every tire manufacturer followed suit after Michelin did this. But essentially, this was a shift towards what's the benefit that the user experiences from the tire? And if you want to take it one step further, what's the feeling that the person actually feels after they receive the benefit from the product, which is probably a whole different talk. It's actually more about tone of voice and design style and creative direction. But ultimately, this is a shift towards customer value and away from product specifications. This is the presentation, a point in the presentation when if I were watching, I would be like, that's all well and good. Give me something concrete to understand and do. So that's what's next. So this is going to be this is where you start putting your homework hat on, start paying attention to what you might do after this presentation. But essentially, this is what you want to do is put yourself in the shoe of your customer. And I say shoe because I misspoke. But ultimately, what I mean is that I want you to pick, when you think about this, rather than thinking about all of your customers or thinking about a wide variety of For example, personas, if you work in marketing and do that kind of work already, frequently what you'll find with any product is you'll go into a room with a bunch of marketers and they'll be like, here's the 3 personas of the people that we want to sell to. It's like 3 different age groups, it's different genders, it's split across vocation. And while that information and work is incredibly valuable and you should be doing it, when it comes to this piece of that journey in terms of articulating value, I would challenge you to step away from the need to speak to everybody, because creative that speaks to too many people is guaranteed to be mediocre. You will never have good, compelling creative that speaks to more than one person, or more than I'm going to say it, I'm taking a stand, more than one person. And so ultimately what I'd like you to do here is think of an individual person that benefits the most from what it is you do or from what it is you sell. Imagine like an actual character. That person is a live human being with a pulse. When we worked at Microsoft, we actually used real people instead of personas, because we found that when we built fictional personas, characteristics would get dragged into the room through meetings. And so we went and picked real customers and we used them as our persona people. That way we couldn't broaden their actual lives in fictional ways to suit our own needs. You don't need to do that, but I strongly recommend that you pick a single person. And so when you think of your product, your company, your service, think of the person who is the most impacted by it. The person, like your perfect customer, your hero customer is the way I like to talk about it, which I'm sure I poached from somebody. But think of your hero customer, and that person is the person who is for whom the solution is perfect, the person who you most change their lives. And then think of 3 things. You want to start making bulleted lists of their jobs, of the jobs they do. And I don't mean like job titles. So it's not like marketing exec or forklift driver or whatever it is. We're talking about the specific actions that they take throughout their day that are parts of their jobs. So if it's a marketing executive, it might be business development, it might be creative briefs, it might be whatever. If it's forklift driver, it might literally be moving boxes. But the way I like to think about it is or the way I like to describe it for myself when I forget this essentially, is imagine a film crew, like a documentary film crew was following them around. And what would that film crew see? What are the jobs that would show up on camera? What are the physical things that they do? Make a list of those things. And then look for gains. Gains is basically a list of what your customer considers to be success. What are the things, what does success look like for them? And then move on to pains, which is a little more self-explanatory. What's getting in the way of success, right? What are their specific pain points in their job? And all of this can relate to the jobs itself, the customer jobs that you've listed out. They should probably all kind of tie together, and which is why I assume they put them in this circle. The next piece we're going to move on to is actually the flip side of this, where you do the same kind of mapping, but for your own business. And so essentially your products and services, I'll list out your products and services, everything that you offer in a very detailed and minute way, gain creators and pain relievers. And ultimately, after you make these 3 lists, what you're going to do, is you're going to start connecting the 2 lists. So you want to pair the gain creators that you offer with the customer successes on the other side. You want to pair the products and services that you offer with the customer jobs on the other side. You definitely want to pair the pain relievers that you offer with the customer pain points. It's absolutely essential. That's usually where you find the most opportunity for growth and success with this kind of work, is every once in a while you'll be like, we've built this incredible thing. Holy shit. Our customer has this one huge problem in their life, and if we just built one more piece of what we do, it would solve maybe the most important problem in their day. So ultimately, look for gaps in any of those 3 areas, but especially look for gaps in pain relievers. And keep in mind that these are just bulleted lists. The kinds of questions you can ask while looking at your customer stuff. I'm going to breeze through this because we're running a little low on time and I want to get to the writing exercise part of it. But I'd recommend that you read through these, either grab the deck or read the video, or see the video, I guess. But ultimately, there's some good prompts in here. These are things that if you're getting stuck writing those lists, read through these questions in relation to the 3 columns for your customer and see if it sparks anything. Some good ones are like, what are their frustrations and annoyances? What solution may they be using currently that they're using incorrectly? What do they value is a really good one. Do they want like a flatter learning curve on their services? Do they want more robust services, more features? Do they want lower costs? My personal favorite is in the bottom point in user gains, which is this idea of what kind of savings actually makes your customer happy. Different customers are looking for savings and growth in their business in different areas. Does your customer value time more? Do they value money more? Do they value effort? Everybody at different points in a business will value each of those things differently, and it's important to understand not only what your customer is and what their job is, but also what stage of growth they're in. Different customers will have more time than money. Different customers will have more money than time. I think we're kind of hitting on the summary here, so this is the do's and don'ts. All of this stuff is basically repeated from before, but we'll just lock it in with a handful of bullets at the bottom. So do absolutely spend time to learn about your customer. And, you know, carrying on with that, go speak to human people. Speak to like live, pulse, having, breathing, warm bodies of people. Whoever it is, like, I don't care what you're building. You want somebody to buy what you're building, go talk to people who would consider giving you money for it and find out what you've missed. And also, like, honestly, ask them if they give you money for it. Like, that's the best thing you can do, is to figure out upfront whether somebody would pay for what you're making. Look for the gaps you're not addressing, pain points specifically. This is just some real kind of simple do's, like writing 101. I spent a lot of my life writing. I also spent a lot of my life writing very poorly. And so I have a handful of things to offer on that front. One of them is and this is my personal technique, so try it on like a suit. If it fits, keep it. If not, throw it away, right? But I never actually think about what I'm going to write until I have a pen in my hand, or in my case, like a keyboard at my fingertips. I have terrible penmanship, so it's always a keyboard. But really, like, I know a lot of people who like think about it in the shower, or they like, you know, basically my experience around thinking and writing as separate activities has been that I double the time it takes to get something on paper. I strongly recommend that at the very least you try this method, which is don't think about it until you're able to write as you think. And then the other piece that kind of falls in that, which frees you up to do that piece a little bit, or that idea a little bit, is don't write and edit on the same day. If you have the freedom and the space to do that in your own timelines and your own bandwidth, always write and then shut it down, and then don't read it again until the next day. First drafts should be messy. First drafts should be ugly, and they should suck to a certain degree. And my experience has been that I'm so stupidly self-critical about writing that if I get caught up on reading and on writing first draft and editing on the same day, I won't really finish the first draft. Don't assume that you know what your customer wants. This is the largest, and if you read the Lean Startup, this is basically like the bulk of the book, right? This is like, if there's a thesis to the Lean Startup, it's you don't know what your customer wants yet, right? And that's the entire idea of hypothesis test, hypothesis test, hypothesis test. But this is really key to the same idea here. Like, this is the same piece of it here, which is essentially like, you don't actually know what your customer wants solved for them yet, unless you've talked to your customer. And don't, for the love of God, like, don't waste years of your life like I have building products without validating them on real customers first. Now, every single time I'm ever in a meeting, a fun kickoff meeting, a side project, a professional project, whatever it is, the very first question out of my mouth, and I think people have grown to hate me for this, but that's what it is what's the cheapest way you can validate that your customers will buy that? And sometimes, man, that's an email. Sometimes it's a Facebook group. Sometimes it's building an Instagram handle and a community around it. Sometimes, you know, in the Lean Startup, they talk about the founder of Zappos. His hypothesis was that people would buy shoes on the internet because nobody had ever bought shoes on the internet before. And so rather than building a business that would scale by, like, you know, warehousing and inventory and building a website, he built a website first. But then when people placed the orders, he walked to the shoe store, bought the pair of shoes in their size, and put them in the mail. And like, it was the least scalable business you ever could have prototyped, right? But that was his MVP, his minimum viable product, because he needed to test the hypothesis that people would buy shoes on the internet. And so whatever it is, whatever your thing is, figure out like the dirt cheapest possible way that you can test whether people will pay you money, and then work from there is my advice. Probably a little outside the scope of this talk, but here we are. Then on to like some don'ts around writing. This is a really big one for me, which is don't write something that you wouldn't say out loud to somebody else. A lot of people write differently than they speak, and if you wouldn't feel comfortable describing your product this way in a bar to a friend over a beer, chances are pretty good it doesn't have any place on your website. Literally, like, I'm not joking. When you write something, try reading it out loud to somebody and see how you feel, and it really will change the way that you write. And then also, you know, lastly, this is kind of falling in line with the same piece, but like, I can't stress this enough. Don't edit the sentence you just wrote. Write the full sentence, write the full page, write the full book. I don't care what it is, and then go back and edit it the next day. homework, and we're pretty much at time here, so I'll breeze through it. But essentially, like as we talked about, right, go through those two lists, make bulleted list of your customers' pains, gains, and jobs. Write down your own product, service, or company's pain relievers, gain creators, services, and products. And then this is when you actually write a real value proposition, which is like the actual assignment of this project. In no more than 4 sentences, answer these questions. How does your product benefit your customer? What's the connection between your product and your customer benefit? So prove that your product benefits your customer. And then what makes you different from your competitors? One line about what sets you apart. What's your differentiating factor? I know this is super fast for the homework piece, but I'm sure we can send it out after as a list or something. Yeah, let's move on to the Q&A. Ultimately, like I've been really seriously helped by so many people in my life on the path to some kind of moderate success career-wise that I'm available for anything. Anybody wants a coffee, anybody wants a chat, like I'm really, really personally into paying it forward for that kind of stuff. So please don't hesitate to reach out. I'm up to talk to anybody about anything, mostly work related, but other stuff too. And do we have any questions?
Awesome. Thank you, Casey.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Why don't you jump out of screen share real quick and we'll just go back to our little haircuts here. And there was a question that came through the chat box. Sharon asked, pain relievers equals features, gain creators equals benefits. It looked like that was a question to me when it came through, but asking, I guess, if that's what connects those two? Or if pain relievers are features and if gain creators are benefits.
Yeah, I suppose that's about right. I think there's not, I don't know that it's always like that directly one-to-one. And I think that ideally really products and services are features. Pain relievers are problems that you solve. So like a specific feature in an app might not be, might solve, for example, more than one customer pain. And so in that way, pain relievers are not necessarily product features, but they're closely tied. Thanks, Sharon.
Awesome. Last question real quick before we shut it down, because like you said, we are at time. But I'm curious, are you working on anything currently in this area where you're trying to figure out how to speak to it from a place of value for a company right now, or what are your current projects on the docket for yourself?
Yeah, a number that are in and outside of this. So I run a full branding agency that does graphic design, full conceptual bits, mostly for tech startups in the Bay Area. But I've recently picked up some Chinese clients, or one Chinese client. I'm looking for a couple more, and that's actually really interesting work for them. Because marketing inside of China feels really different than marketing outside of China. And there's a bunch of companies right now in China that are looking to move into global markets, and so the client that I have currently is very receptive to this kind of idea, and it's really interesting because they really need the full push. They don't really speak this way, and when they do speak this way, it's so aspirational and kind of strangely worded for the Chinese market that it doesn't translate one for one. So yeah, I am doing this. Is kind of my bread and butter still, but I am working. I have my own shop now.
Awesome. Cool, man. Thanks again. And, as I pointed out, this has been recorded. So if you ever want to go back and kind of do it, it's like pause the video and kind of go through step by step the process that Casey was working you guys through in terms of how to start thinking about your product, your company. I would highly recommend that. Or if you think somebody else could benefit from it, send the video around once it's live on our blog archive. But yeah, we'll be back 2 weeks time.
No, I was just going to say, please do, and don't hesitate to reach out. I really am available for emails or whatever.
Awesome. Yeah. So if you ever do get that paragraph, that 4-sentence thing at the very, very end that Casey got to, I'm sure Casey would be happy to take a look at it and give you give you a teacher's grade on how you did with this homework assignment. But yeah, I was going to say, we're back again in 2 weeks with the Colo Creator. So we have a group of influencers in one of our communities that'll be given a knowledge drop panel. It'll be our 3rd ever panel. We have a bunch of them in the screen with us talking about how they built their personal brand and how they used Instagram to sort of like build the brand and find success that way. So join us for that one. It should be good. Thanks again, guys. We'll see you back here next time. Thanks, Casey.